Hey, this is another episode of Business Bests. Hopefully, this is Mike Byrnes. Hopefully, I'm going to bring you some best ideas for your business. This episode will focus in on client relationships and really knowing your clients better than anyone else. I'm a huge believer in if you know them better than anyone else, all kinds of good things happen. You're going to retain them. You're going to get more leads out of them. You're going to be able to market better. Your sales is going to be better, and so on and so on. I probably have 20 reasons why client research is important by the end of this, if not 100. My goal is to give you some examples, kind of give you some best practices, and really kind of at a high level get into probably 8 different techniques for client research. And number one is the one-on-one interview. It's not perfect, but it is a great way to just get to know your clients better than anyone else. The weakness, obviously, is if you're sitting across from somebody and you ask them a question, there are some people that will run away from any form of conflict. You know, literally, they're not going to tell you anything bad. You're just going to get the warm, fuzzy stuff, and then they could be a client that leaves you that week, and you don't know about it, and you're like, what? I just asked them how I was doing, but they're just not wired to tell you in person anything negative. So there's, I don't know what percentage, but there's definitely a good percentage of people in that camp. And then the others that will pick you apart, they have no problem at all criticizing and breaking you down, giving you feedback. I'm a consultant. If you ask me for feedback on how to improve, you're going to get more than you want to hear. And that's just how I'm wired. I want to help people. And so if you ask those questions, you really can't be thin-skinned. And one of the best practices I would say is you really have to listen. I'll talk about it in a little bit later, some examples of people that didn't listen and how bad the client research was because of that. If you're sitting with a couple, and let's say it's a married couple and they're across from you and you ask questions, almost always there's someone is the dominant person in the relationship and they're going to own the time. You're literally going to look at somebody that is, probably going to talk 90% of the time. And obviously, you're in a situation where you want to get the feedback from both people. So let's just say it's the traditional relationship. The male dominant maybe is the case. That's not always the case, but let's just say percentage-wise, that's more likely. How do you get that male person that you're thinking about that's the bulldog and is giving you all the feedback to just be quiet for a minute and let that more elusive advice or more elusive feedback that you're not getting? How do you get that? There used to be a game show, The Newlyweds, and for young people, you might not remember it. If you're my generation or older, you definitely will. It was kind of a fun game. They would send the married couple, they would break them apart and send one spouse in the back room, and they would ask usually the males what they thought of something, and then they would bring the females in and say, hey, what did you think? And see if their answers matched up. And then vice versa, they could keep the women in the room and then send the men back. That was the old traditional model of the show, and there were definitely some funny answers. But I like to think about that scenario. Obviously, if you have clients sitting across from you, you're probably not going to send one out of the room unless it's a very serious conversation. But a technique that you can use is actually just slide them a piece of paper and let them answer the question on the paper, and then pause, let them think it through. And then what that allows you to do is you can then make sure you get the answer for both people. If you just do it verbally, you might get the dominant person obviously taking all the airtime, and then the other one afraid to have a different point of view, so they'll just match or marry up to what that dominant person says. And that dominant person going first will always kind of skew the research, obviously, because the other person doesn't get the first chance to answer the question. Well, by writing it down on a piece of paper and everyone getting those, whether it's 2 people or more, we'll talk about focus groups in a bit, but they get to formulate their answers, think it through, and then you can go to the quieter person and say, hey, what did you think about whatever that question might be, and get to hear them out. You might have to police the more dominant person for butting in and cutting off that person. That's something you have to do delicately, obviously, if they're a client. And sometimes the more dominant person is the one that makes the decisions. But you do want to get the feedback from everybody. So again, a big issue is being aware that you're just going to most likely get the positive feedback, the warm, fuzzy stuff from some people. The other one, the active listening part, is where I said the dominant person might cut off the less dominant person. The person asking the questions can be just as bad. My last meeting I came from was a guy that talked 98% of the meeting, and how can I help that person if they're going to talk the whole time? And I would try to say, okay, I got to cut you off, and then I would say my thing, and before I would go even a minute, I was cut off, and it was happening again. So sometimes clients that I work with are really, really good at talking. They could do a show like this way better than me. They just feel comfortable and can talk for hours. That strength can be a weakness when it comes to research. So active listening is an important thing to do. So listening just is the number one thing in research, right? You have to be quiet. You have to listen. Active listening is kind of more like repeating that you hear what they say. So maybe using their exact words. I hear you saying that. Is this exactly this is what I heard? Is this what you're trying to tell me? That type of acknowledgement in a conversation, it even works with spouses at home, and they can have better communications with each other. But from a business, to be able to acknowledge that you heard somebody, wow, that can really get them off to be stronger clients and have a great relationship with you. So the active listening piece is important, but then like just getting back into what are those things that they care about. So on top of active listening are probing questions. And so this is where you dig deeper and deeper and deeper and just see where those roots of the tree will take you, and don't have a plan. The more you can take what you're trying to learn in the research out of your brain and just see where that conversation goes. And it obviously shouldn't be a conversation. It should be less of you talking and more of them talking. But that research will be that much more effective if you don't have that agenda. You're not like, here's the 10 questions I have to ask. Like literally in a one-on-one, you really want to dig deeper and go from there. So what are some things that you can ask in a one-on-one meeting? Obviously, there's all the generic questions that you would do in a client survey. But the reality is you're going to want to ask things that are kind of unique. I had one client that found out what the person's favorite cookie was. And as a wow client service move, before the next meeting, they had a little oven and they would have pre-made batter ready to go. And they would warm up cookies just as that client was about to arrive. So one, the office smelled phenomenal. But then like that wow moment, like that client's in a great mood right off the bat when they get their favorite cookie served in a warm manner. Like I don't know how my client that did that, I don't know how they weren't 1,000 pounds, because if I was serving up cookies to all my my client meetings, I would definitely, I already got the double chin on this video. Like I don't know how they kept in such good shape. But it was a really cool wow factor. I've kind of seen that at hotels and stuff where you get the warm cookie. But this was even better, that you show up and you get the cookie that's your favorite. So questions like that, just generic things like, how does this office feel when you walk into it? You can get some really crazy feedback on that type of stuff. The problem is, any question that you ask, I should have started with this, is you have to be open to taking your client's advice. If you're just going to ask them questions and they're going to give you feedback and then you don't listen to any of it, don't even bother, because that's just going to upset them. Like if they're going to give you ideas to improve some things, you got to be open to doing it. You can't do all of them. But if you survey your top clients and you really appreciate that relationship, you got to be open to doing what they want you to do. So what's the office feel? Do you have magazines out, artwork, temperature, feeling of, one time I had a client's client say they love the boardroom. It looks so cool. And the advisor had a big glass window internal for everyone that came in the office to just see how cool the boardroom was. But the person said, like, I feel like I'm in a fishbowl and I don't feel like there's great privacy. So that advisor actually added shades to the boardroom. And so at times when the conversations were private, or if they just knew the client was really, really private and didn't want anyone to know about them, they closed the shades. But that was a preference thing. You can ask all kinds of things, and some of this stuff is going to be in person, some of it is going to be in a survey. But I really say those one-on-one types of interviews, they really should be about things that you want to ask the follow-up question, that probing question. So if you have an e-newsletter, what's the right type of frequency? How often should you communicate with them? What should you communicate? How long should it be? How intense should it be? Should they click through to your website to read more content? Do they want it all blasted out? And this is really cool, again, to have two people that have varying opinions sitting across from you, and you could show them something and ask them to formulate their ideas like that newlywed game type of approach and get their feedback. One of the ways to really wow your clients is with client gifts. And I talked about it in a previous video. You really are going to want to know them better than anyone else. That tchotchke type of gift, whether it's everything from a koozie to a really nice jacket or umbrella or all the kinds of things that you can put a logo on, that's kind of a nice to have, but maybe an umbrella comes in handy in the car and someone's getting poured on and they pull it out and like, oh, thankfully I have this umbrella with this name on it. But the reality is you can really make a super impactful connection and build that relationship up if you give a more thoughtful gift. The one-on-one meeting and that research is the time, probably the best time to get to know them better than anyone else and find out what are those things that are important to them. Are they philanthropic? What do they care about? Did they lose a significant person in their life? Did they die because of a disease or a heart issue or whatever it might be? Is there some way to make a connection to their family? Do they care the most about their family? What about their family do they care the most about? Is it coaching Little League or going to a grandkids recital? Is it travel? All those types of things will allow you to come up with a better gifting strategy if that's something that you want to do in your client process. So number two, another form of research is surveys. And you can do these in paper or you can do them electronically. There's tools like SurveyMonkey, and I'm sure there's going to be more and more now with AI to be able to survey your clients. It's a wonderful tool to do this because you can have qualitative and quantitative research. Quantitative is on a scale of 1 to 10, how are we doing? Super important to have that type of information because it gives you a tool to benchmark. So year from year, you might be able to compare how you're doing. It actually, we'll talk about maybe at the end if we have some time, but that type of information can be really important when it comes to knowing how your service models are performing. Overall, it can actually then break it down to a service team if you have a big enough organization. Or just down to the individual person that owns that relationship. How are they doing year from year? Are they improving or are they going the wrong way? If a team is doing better, Team A is doing better than Team B, why is that? Team B can learn from it, but also you might want to tie it into compensation, and if we have more time, we can talk about that. So qualitative and quantitative. An example of qualitative is an open-ended question. So that just allows them to go in any direction. The less leading you can be in all survey work, the better it can be. So for example, you don't want to say, on a scale of 1 to 10, how great are we? Because you're leading them towards great. You want the question, and you don't want to do the opposite either. You don't want to say, how bad are we? You want to have a very neutral type of question, and there's all kinds of examples of surveys failing just in the way that the question is worded. So before the survey is even sent out, sometimes it fails. But let's say you get the question neutral and you leave it open. This is where a qualitative one might be about what do you do well. or what do they like about you? Keep it open-ended and drive them in one direction. But if you have that qualitative one that's around the positive side, make sure you balance it with the qualitative one that's around the negative side. So if you ask the question, what do you like about us? Make sure you ask the question, what do you not like about us? Clients might not feel comfortable about writing that if they're happy, but you can say something like, what could we improve? Or what would you like to see? Literally, a survey that's 3 questions can be super powerful. So the people that say, oh, we don't have the resources to do it, or our clients don't have the time to do it, I'm a big believer of an annual survey because it gives you so many metrics to check in on and compare year to year. But that simple survey, it doesn't take much time. And so if you had the one quantitative measure to benchmark, and then you have 2 open-ended questions, you could gather a whole bunch of information that you might not get, and again, in that one-on-one interview where you have only maybe the warm, fuzzy feedback coming in. All right, so going back to the survey work, if you do want to do a more well-thought-out survey, I like to have a learning agenda in advance. So when we get hired in Byrnes Consulting to do client research work, we'll try to figure out what are they trying to learn about. And then we come up with the questions and a plan of how we're going to get there. So, for example, satisfaction might be the number one thing that you try to learn about right off the bat. Then it might be, what about our services or products? What do you like about them? It might then go into people, and then it might go into your marketing. It might go into things like sales techniques, and so on and so on. The reality is you have to figure out what those learning objectives are, and then create the learning agenda. You can't have a survey that is 800 questions long, right? Realistically, 10 minutes is a lot to ask in a survey where people have short attention spans. So what can you get them to do in 10 minutes? Maybe 15 if they're really close clients. And so you want to ask those more important questions up front. And it is nice to kind of have a theme when they're going through things. I would say if you're trying to figure out the time of it, know that the qualitative, those open-ended questions take more time. You know, it's a multiple choice. It's easy to click, 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 click. When you do an online survey, it's really nice to have different sections of it, because if they see all the questions at once, it could feel kind of overwhelming. There's also some kind of cool things that you can do with online surveys that you can't do in paper. So, for example, you can have logic that says, if such and such gives you a satisfaction score of 6 or below, here's the follow-up questions that you want in the survey. If they give you a 7 and an 8, here's another set of questions that would be unique to that different segment. Oh, by the way, they're really happy with you. We could skip all those and go to the other questions. That logic is fantastic, and I would say most people aren't advanced to think about that, so it's something really, really valuable to do. Survey work, all kinds of cool things that you can learn in survey work. One of the really cool things that you can ask is, do they give referrals? What we'll see is that a lot of times they will say they give referrals, but the client that we work with isn't seeing the results. So it's really interesting to know, especially if we can get their name, and we could talk about a best practice for that at the end. But if you do capture the name of who's filling out the survey, and they check that they give referrals, if they're allowed, and you kind of have the wording in the survey, is it possible that we follow up with you on this stuff, and they click yes, then you could go say, hey, I saw that you said you give us referrals. How could we get to see those people, because they never came to us or we're not aware of them? So then you could take that referral that happened, it's just not a real referral if it doesn't come to you, right? So then you could say, oh yeah, you wanted me to meet X, Y, and Z. Let's set up a better way to do it. So you get introduced via email, you get introduced maybe through social media, but obviously the best way if possible is to get introduced in person. And even you can do a Zoom introduction. More and more people are so comfortable with that type of technology where you have a video conference with people. And you can just have that client do a handoff, and they can only be on I would limit how long they're on that meeting, because they don't have to be on as you start to dig and come up with some some private types of questions. So something to think about. Believe it or not, social media is a really valuable way to get to know your clients better. I can remember when Facebook was new and I was one of the only consultants in the industry talking about, hey, this is worthwhile and this could be something that could be very valuable. And a lot of people didn't believe me. So I had this case study of, I really recommended that somebody connect with all their clients and get to know them better than anyone else. And you'll hear me say that 1,000 times. And when they did, they started with their top clients and they slowly but surely connected. Back in the old days, the older generations connected with Facebook just to keep in touch with what their grandkids were doing. So this is early adoption of Facebook. But this one client of mine saw, he only met with his top client. She was the wealthiest client in his book of business. He only met with her once a year. And he met with her, I believe it was in January. It was kind of had timed the whole year end. And once all that year information came in, that was the time for the meeting. Well, it just so happened in late February, there was a big ice storm and the client fell. She was older and she slipped and fell and broke her collarbone. And so she was in the hospital, and because of Facebook, he found out about it. He might not have found out about it even like if he's only meeting with that top client once a year, which I don't think is enough, but maybe he would have called her and found out, but he found out about it and did what many of you would do if it's your top client. You're just a caring person, you go visit the person in the hospital. Of course, he was a nice person. He brought some flowers and I think some chocolates, and the flower said from the team and the company name on it. But the really cool thing was this wealthy person in the hospital, her friends came, and wealthy people usually hang out with other wealthy people. And sure enough, they saw that person had brought the flowers into the hospital. And this was a financial advisor, and they all said, hey, are you kidding me? Like, my financial advisor doesn't do this type of stuff. Like, he wouldn't even know about it. And they, believe it or not, that whole process got 3 leads to that financial advisor. So it was something really cool where that you could create a wow factor in getting to know those people in what they're sharing. And so, sometimes it's politics and craziness. Maybe it's religion. Maybe it's philanthropy. Probably 100% of the time, there's some kind of family dynamic that's being shared, and that's super powerful to know that information and build that really great relationship. I'm talking about client research. Well, one little tangent is on the prospecting side. Imagine if you connected with a prospect and you saw that they were the biggest fan of their grandkid screaming when they hit a home run and all that stuff. Well, what's the first thing you're going to talk about in that first meeting is, oh man, I saw that video, like that was so cool. And guess what? That prospect's going to talk about it for 10 minutes, and pretty much the sale is done before you even get to talking about what you do, because you've built up that rapport and you got to know that client better than anyone else. So I gave you one simple or a couple simple ideas with Facebook. And now, it depends on the generation, and actually obviously really depends on your client of who you're working with, but Instagram, TikTok, other different tools or techniques are out there. So just be aware of those social networks and what your clients are using. So in a client survey that you send out, that's maybe one of the things you capture in the onboarding techniques. Find out what they use, and then really know how to track them. So we talked about Facebook. Again, that would apply to Instagram or other different things too, if that's what they're using. Just know what they're sharing. But a real valuable one is LinkedIn. So let's say you have the happiest client. They've been known to give referrals over the years. They kind of just lob them in every once in a while, but I'm sure if they knew more people, they would give you 10 leads a year. But they just don't necessarily know that. LinkedIn is such a powerful tool to see from a business perspective who they know. I can only imagine if you have that advocate that would do anything for you. If you sat in them in a meeting and just said, hey, I was just playing around with LinkedIn before you came in, and I saw that you knew Jim Smith and Sally Hayward and whatever it might be, you start to think about these relationships that could be really good prospects for you. and just let those people talk about them. And then you could say, hey, if you think that would be a person that I should meet, don't be afraid to introduce me. It's definitely a little salesy, maybe a little Big Brother-ish. But for that person that, let's say you have a client that's a college buddy that was your roommate in college, will do anything for you. LinkedIn is a really, really powerful tool to know who they know and be maybe a little bit more aggressive with your referral questions. So with client research, one of the really interesting things you can do is have a focus group. Now, how do you get the focus group going? Some do's and don'ts. There's a whole bunch of things. I would say the number one thing to do, and I'm biased because we get paid to do this in the for-profit world, is to hire a facilitator. And the real reason is that people are just trained to react and to defend themselves. And so if negative feedback comes up and it's about you, it's hard to not defend yourself. I'll give you an example. One time I was brought in to just be a listener. I tried so hard to say, I need to be the facilitator. This client didn't want to release that control. And what I do usually as a facilitator is have my client in the room next door, and they can't hear anything. But we've worked out the survey and the research we're going to do in the focus group, so they should feel comfortable with me asking the questions. But this client just wouldn't let go. And it's the last one I would ever allow to happen because of this. It was a marketing question, and it was about an e-newsletter. And the question was, what do you think of the frequency of the e-newsletters? And one person said, I don't remember seeing them, and just kind of accidentally insulted the advisor. And it was such a simple thing. And that person, rather than just take the feedback, said, what, you don't see our newsletter? Like, we send it out this frequency, and this has been all the topics. And I'll tell you right now, that research was done not just for the one person that he kind of just pointed out for not knowing that they got an e-newsletter, but everybody else was scared to give their feedback after that because of the reaction was, I'm going to be, at risk of being bullied in some way. And I guarantee this person that reacted was one of the nicest guys ever. It was just kind of a reaction to defend himself over something so simple. So hire a facilitator. Use a facilitator that you can trust. If you're getting in, one of the things that you're going to want to figure out is who should be in the room. I recommend 8 to 10 people, and if you have couples, try to have a mix of that. Maybe have some people that will just be by themselves. Maybe have a mix of couples, because couples will have an interesting dynamic as opposed to just a single person or one person representing that relationship. So when you build that group, I really would advise you to have a mix of what those people might be. And then the reason you want to have a facilitator, back to that, is imagine some negative feedback comes up, and that's the best time for it to come up in a focus group, right? So you start to learn about it. This is how you can, learn, evaluate, and improve. Really, that's what you want to do with this research. Now, imagine that one person is just a bad apple, and that whole saying that the bad apple could ruin the bunch is true. So if a facilitator isn't trained on how to deal with a situation like that, that whole focus group can go rogue, and actually the other clients that might have been happy can turn into disgruntled clients. So you really have to get the right facilitator. You really have to have one that knows the industry too, because they can ask all kinds of questions that just aren't irrelevant. They might not know how to probe and get deeper in areas that are important. And just having industry knowledge to be able to benchmark against other focus groups about other kind of client feedback, some consistencies that you might see. So if it's something that's really consistent, you don't have to ask a lot of follow-up questions. But if it's something that's rare that you don't hear about much, you might want to learn about it and get into it deeper. So one of the things about focus groups is that you can get client interaction and you can get some interesting dialogues going back and forth, and that can be really healthy. I could obviously go rogue and not be good. So when you have that facilitator, it can be really, really valuable to know when to kind of let loose of the reins and then when to tighten them up. This has been another episode of Business Bests by Mike Byrnes. Obviously, I ran out of time talking about client research, so I'm going to do a whole part 2 on this. I hope you tune in for the next episode, and I look forward to sharing a whole bunch of valuable information on this topic.